Good evening and welcome to Around the House. Coming up on tonight's programme, they've had plenty of showdowns at the dispatch box, but for the first time it's Cameron versus Corbyn at the ballot box. We'll be asking whether Labour's new leader can deliver those votes in the looming local elections and whether anyone can catch the SNP in Scotland. But first, to the poll that overshadows all others right now, the EU referendum. The campaign's officially underway with the north of England at the very centre of activity. Both camps know it's working class Labour votes that'll probably decide the result, and they know where to find them. In a moment we'll be asking two figures from the in and out camps to go head to head. But first, here's a flavour of the race so far.
To be honest, I have no idea.
Britain would be permanently poorer if we left the European Union.
We would not fall off the edge of the world or find the English Channel replaced by a sulphurous ocean of burning pitch.
Yeah, but it's important. I think everybody should participate in it.
Very important. I think it could affect, our economy and obviously our trade.
Under any alternative, we'd trade less, we'd do less business, there would be less investment, and the price would be paid by British families. Wages would be lower, prices would be higher, and that means that Britain would be poorer by £4,300 per household.
Those of us who want to leave believe that Britain's best days lie ahead, that our country has tremendous untapped potential, which independence would unleash, and our institutions, values and people would make an even more positive difference to the world if we are unshackled from the past.
There's a lot resting on it, but I'm not really bothered which way it goes, to be honest.
I might even vote for the first time ever.
Well, there are only two choices in this referendum, leave or remain, and we've got each side here tonight for a head-to-head debate. Julie Elliott is the Labour MP for Sunderland Central and a staunch supporter of remaining in the EU, and Jonathan Arnott is UKIP's MEP for the North East, and it goes without saying he wants us to leave the EU. So good evening to both of you. And look, leaving the EU can't be both good and bad for our region. So Jonathan Arnott, why do you think you're right? Why do you think we should leave?
Well, first of all, of course, we spend almost £55 million a day in the UK being members of the European Union. Then we get some of that money come back with strings attached. I believe we could spend that better off ourselves. It'd be better to be able to get some control back of our democracy, of our sovereignty, being able to make our laws for ourselves. And, of course, that means that we'd be able to place controls on immigration from the 27 other countries of the European Union, giving us the chance to bring in the people who bring skills that we need in our economy, but actually being able to say no to the people who are going to come in and not make this country a better place.
OK, Julie Elliott, why are you right? Why should we stay in?
It's about jobs, workers' rights, security. It's so straightforward. I can't see any reason why we should leave or why we're better off leaving. Economically, we get much more out of being a member of the EU than we put in, certainly in the North East. And our economy in the North East, 160,000 jobs depend on our trade with the EU. They're good, they're well-paid jobs, and they would go over time. Not the day after, but over time. And that's far too big a risk to take.
OK, Jonathan Arnott, Julie's mentioned the economics there, and the Chancellor too this week said that leaving the EU would cost every household £4,300 a year, particularly affecting the poorest households the most. Why would anyone in our region want to take that kind of risk? We can't afford it, can we?
First of all, because if you look at those figures, they're such scaremongering. They take every possible negative scenario imaginable and don't consider any of the positives of leaving the European Union whatsoever. Those figures are far, far worse than the European Commission's own figures. But actually, when you look at economists, for example, like Patrick Minford of the Institute for Economic Affairs, he comes up with figures that actually are much more in terms of the amount of money that we'd be saving per family.
Most economists, and in fact even Leave.eu, which was originally potentially one of the campaigns that could have led the Out campaign, both of them have, economists and Leave.eu have said this week that it would cost money.
No,
it might be a question of how much, but it would cost money.
What Leave.eu said, I think, was if it cost money, then they'd still think that it would be worth it for the chance to get our freedom back, to be able to govern our country once again. They're not saying, of course, that we would be. Well,
do you think it wouldn't cost anything then to leave the EU? It wouldn't affect the economy at all.
I think we would be better off leaving the European Union.
But would it cost the economy?
We are losing jobs. We are losing jobs right here, right now, being members of the European Union. We're seeing firms being put out of business by the VAT regulations. We're seeing companies that are struggling to stay in the UK. We even heard Prudential talk about moving out to Asia because of EU regulations very recently. There are companies right here, right now, struggling to survive within the European Union. And actually, I take the view that once we're outside the European Union, we can start to look at the wider world. We can start developing our trade links once again with those countries which we have neglected for so long. I don't believe we should be obeying EU regulations when we're trading with ourselves in the UK, where most of our businesses do business. So actually, no, I take the view that we would be better off in terms of the economy if we were to leave.
And Julie Elliott, there's a lot of talk about trade and how trade would dry up if we left the EU, which is a big factor for our region because we export more than we import, unlike most other regions in the UK. But the truth is, as Jonathan says, we'd be able to sign other agreements. No one's going to say we don't want British imports, and equally they're not going to say we don't want to export to Britain. So what's the risk?
But it's the terms you do trade on. And I have to say, I don't recognise the region Jonathan's talking about, the region I've lived in my entire life. I firmly believe that the good jobs would disappear over time, and all of the evidence and the vast majority of economics believe that. But I'm not saying that we wouldn't have trade agreements with countries. Of course we would. We trade with the rest of the world as well as the EU. However, the terms on which you do that trade as a single country doing trade deals is overwhelmingly worse conditions. And as for free borders, all of the countries in Europe, like Norway and Switzerland, places that often the Out campaign talk about, they all have to have open borders as a prerequisite of having to trade with the EU.
That's not true. Liechtenstein does not, does it? Does Liechtenstein, yes or no?
We don't have
Do we want to be Liechtenstein, though?
At the moment.
Are we modelling ourselves on a country that is that small? We are the 5th largest economy in the world.
My point is that actually we can do better because we are bigger than 3 times the size of Norway, Switzerland and Liechtenstein put together. And actually we're being told that we're going to get a worse deal than any of those.
The evidence doesn't say that. If you trade as a single small country, you don't have all
we're
of the
world's
advantages.
5th largest economy.
We are a small
They're the world's
country.
2nd largest economy.
You do not
you
trade
don't
on the good terms that we have as being part of the EU bloc. It's absolute nonsense, Jonathan, and
for the world's 5th largest economy to not be able to trade with the world's 2nd largest economy on a better basis than Switzerland or Liechtenstein is absolutely
on a better
nonsense.
basis than we trade now.
And you look at
10% levy on every car that would be sold into the EU from Nissan. That's the reality.
No, the reality is that we would negotiate a trade deal. The reality is that they sell more to us than we sell to them. The reality is that we are net importers. If we're net importers from the European Union, then we are their best customers. It makes perfect sense that they would want to give us a good deal because they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot. We want to be good friends, good neighbours with Europe. Read article 8 of the Lisbon Treaty. It makes it very clear that is how a trade deal would work.
Real jobs in the real world out there, and people out there, the people I represent, the people I've always lived amongst, I firmly believe are better off staying in the EU. The things that you're talking about are just pie in the sky, kind of ideological rubbish as far as I'm concerned.
But you look at real people losing their jobs right here, right now.
One moment. Is that fair to say that it's pie in the sky? Because actually, you look at the UKIP vote in the North East, they did pretty well in the general election. They did very well in the local elections.
They didn't do as well as Labour.
That's true, but people are very concerned about immigration in the North East. And it's not just about an economic case, there are other factors here too.
They're concerned for a whole raft of reasons, but I don't think our membership of the EU is all about immigration. Absolutely not. Immigration is a separate issue, it's a serious issue and something we should tackle very firmly and have very firm guidelines on.
But you can't tackle it whilst in the EU.
The immigration argument with our membership of the EU, which is fundamentally an economic and social thing, is entirely getting your messages mixed up. And that is what the Out campaign want to do, but it's not the reality of where the argument is. The argument is about jobs, it's about paid holidays, which are things that come from the EU. It's about our rights and responsibilities that we get as being members of the EU. And as I said before, I firmly believe the people I represent, the people in the North East, are better off remaining in.
And actually on immigration, it's a bit misleading, isn't it? There's a lot of talk of immigration in the northeast, and you talk it up, but actually there isn't that much immigration in the northeast. It's a bit of a misnomer.
But also the northeast, remember, is the area of the highest unemployment in the UK, and of course the immigration that we do have is having a bigger effect, and proportionally, actually, the growth in immigration in the northeast is very, very high indeed. I mean, you see a lot, for example, in Middlesbrough. But I mean, look. The point about this is having the opportunity to control our own borders. And for you to tell, well, anybody from France, Germany, Romania, Greece can just walk into the UK, no questions.
We know who comes in.
They have to have a passport, but the point is that they can come and live and work in the UK
and our country
with no
economically
questions
benefits
asked.
from European Union citizens who work here.
But
we take in more financially than we give out. So would you want us to have less money coming into our economy? Because that is the reality.
Nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And let me tell you why it's absolute nonsense.
It's not nonsense.
Well, I can tell you why it's nonsense if you let me.
Just briefly, because we're going to wrap this up in a second.
Okay, very simply, it's nonsense for the simple reason that if you choose who comes into the UK, you get all of the people who bring money into the economy, but you don't bring those into the UK who are costing us money. So you can have the best of both worlds if you choose. Now, why would anybody? Why would anyone ask?
Last words, Julia.
The people who come in from the EU to live and work here pay more into our economy than they take out. That's the reality.
And you can do even better if you choose.
We are going to talk about this much, much more in the run-up to this referendum, but we're going to leave it there for now because the EU referendum isn't the only time many of us will put a cross on the ballot paper this summer. There are also local and Scottish elections just around the corner, and when voters go to the polls on May the 5th, it'll be the first big test of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. In a moment, we'll be discussing what a good result would look like for Labour in the north of England, but first I've been speaking to the political correspondent of the Herald newspaper, Kate Devlin, about what looks like a foregone conclusion in Scotland. All right, and Jonathan Arnott, interesting for UKIP because you weren't really around to such an extent as a party the last time some of these elections took place. At least your popularity wasn't quite up there. So what would a good result look like for UKIP, do you think, in the North East and the rest of our region?
I think a lot of it is going to be seeing progress in terms of vote share, that we see ourselves move across a large chunk of the region into being the main challengers to Labour in a lot of those council seats. But there are areas where we have put the work in over a number of years and where I think that will start to bear some fruit. So I would expect, for example, that we'll see some serious progress for UKIP in Hartlepool this time, where of course we finished just 3,000 votes short of winning that constituency at the general election. So I'd expect to be looking at Hartlepool saying, how can we achieve something there? And I think we'll see progress elsewhere. I think we'll do pretty well in South Tyneside, where of course there have been certain local difficulties with the Labour Party. I think in Sunderland we do tend to do pretty well in Sunderland. I think that's somewhere where we've built our vote over a long period of time, and I think there might just be one or two wards where we might see a breakthrough there as well.